How Dovid HaMelech, he was the king, certainly one of the Gadol Ador. But he would ask his Rabbi everything. Yofeh danti, was my psak correct? This is Dovid HaMelech, this is leadership. We already discussed the idea that at times a leader knows better than to ask questions. So what's this about? So I'd like to discuss the entire issue of asking questions. We'll begin with asking questions on our level. Then we can talk about Dovid HaMelech. Yes, we work on our integrity. We try to develop a passion for truth. We're aware of bias, of our tendencies to be either swayed by social conditioning, what's popular, or in some cases the opposite, sort of like the idea of going against the consensus. We're aware of all of that. And we're looking for truth. And we mean it. That doesn't mean we're right. You got to remember, in the Second Temple era, among the Kohanim, gedolim, among the high priests, we had Tzedokah, we had Sadducees. How'd they get there? It seems that position was for sale. They believed, by a literal reading of the verse, that the Kohen Gadol was to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the Kedoris, the offering of incense, already sitting on the coals, to come in a cloud of Kedoris. Torah Shebel Peh taught us that he is to place the Kedoris on the coals in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which called for some acrobatics. To walk into the Kodesh HaKadoshim was really something, was frightening. If you weren't worthy, they would have to pull you out. And not alive. So the Gemara relates that there was this Tzedoki, Kohen Gadol, preparing to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And he was asked, aren't you afraid? And what does he say? Kol yomai, all of my days, hayisi mitztarer, I was in pain. When will this opportunity come to me and I will fulfill it? These are the very words that Rabbi Akiva used when he was being tortured to death. And he accepted it with joy. And they asked him, Ad kedei kach, you're going through all this suffering and you're still happy? And he said, yes, all my days. I just couldn't wait for this opportunity. The fact that someone's sincere, the fact that someone's willing to give his life for it, is no guarantee that it's true. Rabbi Akiva gave his life for something that's true, and the tzedakah were giving their lives for something false. So how do you know? How do you know you're right? How do you know you found truth? We learn to try our best. We learn to try and be honest. Again, we work on our integrity. But we can be mistaken. You have to ask questions. You have to ask people that are bigger than you. First of all, if this is halacha, you got to ask someone who knows it. What if it's not? So we've discussed this many times. The study of Torah is aligning your brain with kavayachol, the way Hashem thinks. Asking someone who's been immersed in study for years, that knows so much of Hashem's wisdom. There's a certain confidence that we've got. His brain is aligned with the way Hashem thinks. But it doesn't end there. So you ask a question, and the answer doesn't make sense to you. It just doesn't sit well. Says the Rambam, you have to challenge your Rebbe. It is his obligation to have it make sense to you. He's got to convince you. Now, it could be, once again, we're talking halacha, it could be you just don't have the facts. You don't know the halacha. But in a situation where it's a matter of what we've been discussing, doing things for Klal Yisrael. He says, no, you have to ask him, why not? It's got to make sense. If it doesn't make sense to you, what do? So here's one fine point. If to you what he told you was nonsense, you know you're wrong. Nobody is infallible. Everyone can make mistakes. But to think that a great person is a fool, you know you're off. You're missing something. That you hear where he's coming from, but it doesn't sit well with you. You'll have to go your way. But you got to hear him out. And you got to try to fully comprehend what he's telling you. And you've got to let him help you do that. understand that to many the concept of Das Torah today has become almost superstitious. Big people have Ruach HaKodesh, you have to follow them. I suggest that before you do that, you ask the person you think has Ruach HaKodesh if he thinks that you have to follow him because he has Ruach HaKodesh. You know, even amongst the Hasidim, who really put everything in the Rebbe. There were groups within Hasidus thought otherwise. The Kotzkers, they've got stories. But those are old-time stories. I'll tell you a story that happened with a friend of mine. This was with the Beis Yisrael, who was the Ger Rebbe. When I came to Eretz Yisrael, very big, very, very big. Everyone agreed he was in every way. And by the way, yes, Ger comes from Kotsk. Is that his friend? One of the big things in Ger is Hasmada. And the minhag there was that you'd come learn early in the morning, especially Bachrim would come early in the morning. And the Beis Yisrael himself would walk around giving out tea. So this friend of mine learned the Mir. Used to learn Ger early in the morning. And then the Beis Yisrael approached him with tea. And he said, I mean, the halach is one doesn't drink before davening. The Rebbe was so happy. He was just so happy. He wasn't the Ger Chassid. He said, why don't mine talk like that? And from then on, every morning, instead of offering tea, he would come over and say good morning when he went out making the rounds. Out of respect for someone who stood up for what he knew was right. Okay, so this is for us. The question is Dovid HaMelech. Dovid HaMelech, he was so big. He wrote parts of Torah Shebiksav. He wrote Tehillim. Yes, he wrote it with Ruach HaKodesh, but it wasn't Nevuah. It was Ruach HaKodesh, which is an inspiration. He made up the words, and it became Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shebiksav means every word, every letter has Kedusha to it. If you don't know what you're saying, you're doing wonderful things up in heaven just by reciting it. So Dovid HaMelech, every time he answered a shaila, and the Gemara says yes, even though he was the king, every man and woman would come to him with their with their questions, and he answered, and then he would go to his Rebbe and say, was I right? Why is he doing this? So this is something else I've seen. Big people know what it takes to become a big person. They have even more respect for people bigger than themselves than we have. They know what it means. They know what it means. Somebody big has more respect for big people than we little guys do. Because they know what it took. They know what it took to become like that. It's hours of toil. It's painful inner work. It's challenge yourself in and out, challenging yourself, questioning your every midah. And of course, working on Yiras Shamayim, on levels of Kedusha. One doesn't become big just because they've got a good head. They know. They have a different kind of respect for one another because they know what it means. And they value one another's opinion because of that. What's interesting though is when they choose to be mevatel their das, to just totally acquiesce to someone that they think is bigger. If you look around the tshuvas of the earlier ones, the early achronim, find some very interesting things. Well, there's one particular tshuva that puzzles me. There's a tshuva, the tshuva's Ramah. There was a shaila of a Yerusha. The Ramah gives his old psak. Then he writes, Rabbi Yosef Karo also wrote a tshuva on it. So he writes, Botla daiti, I am just completely acquiescing, I mean, mevatel my das to that of Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbi Yosef Karo decided, that's what we're going to do. The very next tshuva, he writes the whole thing again. He sends it to Maram Padva, who's another one of the Gedolei Ador. And he asks him, tell me the truth, who's right, Rabbi Yosef Karo or me? He changed his mind. What it seems to be the case is that he was not going to paskin against Rabbi Yosef Karo. But he was so sure he was right. See, he decided for reality check to ask Maram Padva, whose side are you on? It's an interesting thing. He acquiesced without giving in. He felt he was right, but we're going to follow Rabbi Yosef Karo because he's bigger. But I think I'm right. In more contemporary tshuvas, this is another one that I haven't totally figured out. Rav Moshe Feinstein in the Igros Moshe is fearless. He goes through the sugya the way he understands it. He will argue on gedolim of previous generations. One shuva where he argues with the Chassam Sofer, and he writes there, I didn't really want to publicize this, because who might argue with the Chassam Sofer? But, and then he goes to the sugya, and at the end he says, so you see now that I am right. And he argues, with Gedolei Achronim all over the place. In one particular tshuva, he starts going one way, and then he says, but Kfar Horazokin, there was already a psak in this. Who was this? Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin. Rav Henkin was the Rav in New York when Rav Moshe arrived to New York. Big man. When the immigrants, the Holocaust survivors, arrived in New York, they came to the Lower East Side after Ellis Island. They came to the Lower East Side, and he was the Rav. So he writes, Kfar Horizokin, Rav Henkin Paskin, forget about what I think, this is the way it's going to be. He's got another tshuva on something very serious, and he argues with Franken. When a Gadol decides to argue with another Gadol and paskin that way, and when not, I guess you got to be one of them to figure it out. By the way, the same Igros Moshe has no problem arguing with the Mishnah Brura. Sometimes he doesn't even mention him, even though the Mishnah Brura explicitly said otherwise. He has no problem with it. He's much more careful in arguing with the Aruch HaShulchan. Why am I going into all of this? Big people have a whole different cheshbon. And they definitely have a greater respect for Gedolei Yisrael than everyone else does. A Gadol b'Yisrael has a different kind of understanding of what it means to be a Gadol b'Yisrael. And because of that, they have much more respect for it than we do. Now, I'm making it sound like there's the little guys and the big guys. There's a long way between. And I think that as you all grow and realize what growth entails, and you've all grown, and you're going to continue to grow in Yirtzeh Hashem. But you know it's hard work. The harder you work, the greater you become. The more you have an appreciation for bigger people, and the more you're going to take them seriously. And we definitely see it this way. It seems that the smaller you are, the easier you find it to dismiss what great people say. It's because you have less of an understanding of what it means to be great. As you grow and know how every step along the way calls for so much effort and self-discipline, and you know what it's like to break your head on a sugya. Your concept of what it means to be great changes. And you're going to want to take bigger people a lot more seriously than when you first started out. If you're going to assume some position of leadership, be it a position that existed and you fill it, be it a position that you created, as much as you've got to go with your passion. And don't allow yourself to be discouraged. And don't let others put a damper on it. And don't ask too many questions, because people will raise issues and you'll start doubting yourself. But make sure you maintain a relationship with people you respect, so that you're not going to make some major mistake, because you could. Not everybody that went the wrong way was deranged. There are good people that made bad mistakes. And had they maintained a close relationship with bigger people, it would not have happened. Definitely would not have happened. I want to add something to this, which, although is slightly related to it. It's a different kind of a sugya. But I think it's important as well. Throughout Chazal, we find the concept of Chochmas Isha Vansa Besa, the special role of women as having their Bina Yesera. Yirtz Hashem. You're going to go fight for the Jewish people. Probably not going to happen until you settle down. And there's a common problem. A common problem that develops in yeshiva and can only get worse, which is the more you learn, the more you believe in yourself, the more you respect the reasoning, the system of reasoning in your learning. And all too many yeshiva guys don't take their wives seriously. Because they don't learn Gemara. And they don't know the lingo, you know? They don't know how to do this. Gadol Yisrael over the generations ran their ideas through their wives. And sometimes they didn't do that, but they got some unsolicited advice from their wives. And the greatest went with them. There's another way. There's another way of accessing divine wisdom. For men, it's through the Gemara. There's this Bina Yesera that comes with it, that comes with Yirah Shamayim. That great Jewish women have. And they can see past things in a way that often their husbands can't. Of course, there's the classic On ben Pelas, his wife, who saved him. Saved him last minute. He was on Korah's side. It's about her that Chazal say, Chochmas Nishabon Sabesa. She saw through it. Korah started a movement, and she saw it as personal ambition and nothing more. How come he didn't? She was able to. So it's a different kind of thing. This is not the Amunas Chachamim that we were discussing up until now. But I guess that if we're going to discuss how much do you trust yourself, how much do you really have to see to it that you run it by people bigger than yourself? So sometimes it's people that are bigger than yourself, but sometimes even that's not enough. There's another perspective, another angle that you could be totally oblivious to. Got to make sure that you're covering yourself in all directions. And then, of course, you have to daven to Hashem. We should all be saying a tefillah that we begin our learning with every day in the Beis Medrash. We ask Hashem that we not make mistakes. This is something one definitely has to constantly be praying for if he takes up any leadership position in Klal Yisrael. Hashem, I'm trying my best, but please keep me on track and make sure I don't make any mistakes.